My name's Nathan Gard. Been with the Irving Police Department for just shy of 17 years. I met Andrew Esparza about a year after being hired. I attended the Basic Police Academy, and upon graduation, his class began attending the same academy I went to. Our first shift, we were fully cut loose and out of training. We landed on the same shift, and we worked joining beats. So we ended up on a lot of calls together, and I grew up in a very small town, kind of removed from the world, and Andrew seemed to have a way of communicating with people, and I learned a lot from him in that aspect. He had a very calming demeanor and instilled that in me, kind of taught me how to effectively communicate with people, because that was, and quite honestly, it was an area I was lacking as a new officer. He was just an amazing human being. He had a way of calming people, talking to people, and even those people he ended up putting in jail, he built a good rapport with them. If he had, I recall being on a foot chase with him and chased the guy down, ended up having to tackle the guy, and by the end of the ride to jail, it seemed like they'd known each other for a while and had almost become friends, as weird as that sounds. I became very close with Andrew's family as well. I spent a lot of time with them in Burleson. I played golf with his brother Ralph and Andrew, and their now brother-in-law, Brian Stahl, and I'd play with their father, Ralph Sr. So we'd spent quite a bit of time together playing golf and playing poker and just hanging out on our days off. That was one thing. Andrew and I both enjoyed running, so we would find at least one of our days off and spend some time running together and talking. Our family dynamics were very similar, and kind of the way we grew up. We were very close to our families, and both had siblings around the same age, so it gave us another area where we were very consistent and alike in ways. Our interests were the same. Took many trips, whether it was to Oklahoma to go canoeing, or we went to skiing in Jackson Hole. Just me, Andrew, his older brother Ralph, and their brother-in-law Brian, the four of us. So we kind of became a little band of brothers ourselves, and I'm still very close with his family, and hang out with his older brother Ralph on a regular basis. Andrew became one of my closest friends, even though he was in my life for a relatively short period of time, and I feel very blessed that I had the opportunity to be a part of his life. It's very rare for a young officer to get assigned to a shift where you have weekends off, but it's always kind of our goal. We put in for it with hopes and dreams of getting that as a rookie officer. Just my luck, I landed on the shift with weekends off. So I had the night off on the evening of Andrew's accident. I recall like every detail of that night. I was at home watching the movie Blood Diamond, and it was pouring rain. I got a phone call from another really good mutual friend of ours telling me that Andrew had been in an accident, and it was very bad, and that I needed to come to the station. As soon as I got here, I was directed to Parkland Hospital. I was informed that his family was en route. They were on vacation out of town, and I had the unfortunate opportunity to see Andrew after he'd passed. I still carry quite a bit of guilt for not being there whenever he was involved in the accident and not being able to do my part. That did lead me to a good place I had the opportunity to attend the cops co-workers retreat. I met a lot of good people who have been through similar situations. I got to hear some of our officers' perspectives on what occurred that night and realized that I'm not alone in feeling the way that I do, and it really helped me get to a better place. Andrew was a very good man all the way around. I know he's dearly missed by his friends and family and his Irving police family as well. That tragedy did bring about some positive changes within our police family, the police department in general. While the accident was just that, a tragic accident, we now have a more comprehensive fleet maintenance program. I feel officers, including myself, take more time to do their daily vehicle checks to make sure that the car is well maintained and ready for their shift.
Hi, my name's John Mitchell. I've been an employee with the City of Irving Police Department since 1989. And I'm here to speak about my friend. The loss of Andrew Esparza affected me deeply. Andrew was not only a coworker, he was someone who I trained, but most importantly, Andrew was a friend of mine, a personal friend of not only me, but my family, prior to the time that he had started with the police department. Andrew had an infectious smile, heart of gold, just absolutely one of those people that when he walked in a room, you were attracted to him. He was a magnetic personality, and he was one of those who was so tremendously talented in so many ways, but he was a phenomenal teammate. He wasn't one of those talented individuals, as an example on the basketball court. You knew that he was one of the best ones on the court, but he always made sure that the person who wasn't anywhere near worthy of being on the court with him was included in the game. It was just, he was that kind of person. The first time I met Andrew was at a church retreat, and he was trying to decide whether or not he wanted to be a police officer. And his brother Ralph, who works here at the police department and is a dear friend of mine, brought Andrew to the church retreat and introduced us, and we became fast friends, discussing what it meant to be a police officer and all of those things. At the time, he was in sales down in the San Antonio area, if I remember correctly, and he knew in his heart he wanted to be a police officer because of the servant's attitude that he had, but I think his struggle was he wasn't going to make much money being a police officer, whereas in sales there was those opportunities, and he really had to decide where he wanted to be with that. So we spent that weekend having conversations on and off about what it meant to be a police officer and the kind of demands, not only personally but professionally and academically and physically and all of that. And it wasn't too long after that where he decided to test with us, and he was hired. Once he was hired, I was working at the training academy still, and he was one of my recruits that I was responsible to and for, and through that process, I got a firsthand knowledge of Andrew's leadership, his skills with just dealing with people. His class was a pretty big class, and it was very obvious that his classmates looked up to him just to bring calm, to set the stage for this is how we're going to handle our business, and we're going to study and work hard, and we're going to be the best we can to serve the citizens of Irving. I always knew I could call Andrew, whether it was day or night, and ask him a question if it was something that had come up at the academy, and not only was he going to have an answer, he wasn't going to hesitate to share that answer with me, even if it meant maybe getting himself or one of his peers in trouble. Once Andrew graduated from the academy, or prior to him graduating from the academy, I was actually promoted to sergeant. So the next interactions that I had with Andrew professionally was he was assigned to my shift as a new police officer. And to say that Andrew was a natural is selling it short. That young man, he just came by being a police officer naturally. The best way I can describe him is he had a heart of a lion and hands of a servant. I don't know any other way to describe how he handled his business. You'd see him one day in a foot chase with someone who had burglarized a car, and the next day he's having a conversation with a young mother who's just trying to figure out how to put her child in a car seat. And he had a natural ability to be both of those people without being offensive or offended. Just a true joy to watch. The night of his accident, I was working south side and he was working north. And I remember it like it was yesterday. It was raining, it was windy, it was a rotten day to be a cop to begin with. And then to start hearing those calls come in over the radio, words can't describe, the feeling, the helpless feeling of those kind of things when you hear that, and then to think about some of the people that were first responders were his classmates who had the same relationship, or knew Andrew as I did. Some of them certainly a better relationship than I had with him on a personal level, but they knew all the things about Andrew that I described. That heart of a lion. You just would never expect to lose someone, especially at such a young age, that was so dynamic. One of the first phone calls I made after getting the word was to my wife. Like I said earlier, he was a personal friend. He was somebody that we had gone to church with. My two sons looked up to him. He not only Ralph but Andrew would talk about professional wrestling with our youngest son. Just had a great relationship with him, and they respected him as much as I did, and rightfully so. So words just can't describe the loss, the whole, not only in my heart, but in the heart of everyone that knew him at the loss.
I'm Andrew Baugh. I'm a detective with the Irving Police Department. I've been here just under 17 years. Andrew and I went to the academy together. We were in separate classes. We were hired from the same test, but he went to the academy the class after mine. At that time, we were going to COG, so there were 3 academy classes, and he was the one just after mine. So after I got cut loose, I went through FTO, and Andrew got cut loose shortly after me. I think it might have been 6 weeks, it might have been 8 weeks, something like that, but it was fairly quick after that Andrew and I started working together. The first shift he got to bid, we bid the same side of town, and so we were both on the north side. Andrew worked the east side of town, and I worked the west side of town. He was a 50s beat, and I was a 40s beat overlap. So we got to see each other on a bunch of calls, and frequently if there was a 50s beat out, I'd work a beat next to him. Got to see a lot of them on the street. So Andrew always worked hard. He always took care of his beat. He always had beat integrity, but he was fairly active and wanted to make a bunch of arrests. And so he came to me and he talked to me about, hey, we both like to be active. How about if you're doing an arrest, I'll try to cover your area. If I'm doing an arrest, you try to cover my area that way. The surrounding beats don't get upset at us that we're always taking arrests or taking people to jail. So he understood and recognized that he still wanted to have beat integrity and make sure that we took care of problems that came out of our beat. So it was always good to work next to him. He was always fun. He could talk to people really well. people respected him because he talked, he'd never talked down to people. So when Andrew was on the scene, you always knew it wasn't going to spiral out of control because he was getting mad at someone or someone was getting mad at him. He was easygoing. We were friends at work and outside of work. I knew his brother, Ralph, obviously. Ralph was FTO as I was coming through. I didn't have Ralph as an FTO, but Ralph was always teaching people stuff. And so I had met Ralph and I met Andrew, played cards with them a couple times outside of work, and they were funny to be around together. They were, I mean, you were laughing the whole time that they were together. Outside of work, Andrew was just as motivated. He always talked about, he wanted to open a franchise, and he specifically talked about Chipotle. He was thinking about his life after policing. He knew that his police career he started young, and that it would only be a part of his life, and that he was going to have a career after policing. So Andrew was always thinking of the future and what he was going to do. So that night of the accident, I was a 7 o'clock unit. Andrew was a 7 o'clock unit, and he worked the east side of town. I worked the west side of town. I was 243 that night. Andrew was dispatched as a backup to Taylor, who was on an accident on 183. And Dustin and I were on a knock and talk in my beat, trying to get into some guy's house who was selling meth out of a trailer. When we were standing there knocking on the door, we could hear them calling for Andrew and asking him to respond, and he wasn't responding, and both Dustin and I looked at each other because that wasn't like Andrew. Andrew was pretty attentive to where he was and what he was doing and his surroundings, and he didn't miss calls on the radio. So when he didn't respond, we both looked at each other like, hey, something might be up, and we kind of broke off from the knock and talk and headed back to our squads. And we were getting in our squads and heading that way when they did the roll call. And I think that's when we realized it could be serious, when they did the roll call and no one was responding for Andrew's beat. So he and I were dispatched to the accident. Dustin and I were. Dustin and I, coming from the same location, got there around the same time, and there were other squads at the car already. So as we were pulling up, they yelled at us on the radio to block off all of 183. So we just put it in reverse on the highway and drove back to the next exit, and just threw out a flare line at O'Connor, making everyone exit at O'Connor. And then just kind of waited from there, trying to hear what was going on. Sergeant Bradford came back once we had let through the ambulance and told us it didn't look good. And Dustin and I were just stacking flares. I remember there was so much water that night in that storm. It dumped so much water so fast. Even that part of 183 that doesn't flood had several inches of water just on the highway, and we were stacking our flares because they were going out so fast. Water was washing them over, and we were stacking flares and then putting the lit ones on top of the stack just so people would see them to exit. After the ambulance left and we were standing out there, that the news started spreading, Sergeant Bradford came back and told us that they had declared him dead at the hospital, and we just went back to work. I ended up getting a text from Sergeant Ripley asking if I wanted to go to the hospital, and I went to the hospital. Everyone was pouring in from all the officers that were off duty were already showing up. All the officers on duty that could break away were showing up at the hospital, and we were just waiting on the Esparzas to get there because Ralph was out of town. After Ralph showed up and they viewed the body, then all of us that were on duty got a chance to go in there and see the body and say something to him. And I remember seeing him lay there and joking with him, like, man, it was so surreal, because he didn't look like anything was wrong, and I mean, Andrew just joked with everybody. You wanted to be like, man, come on, get up, let's go back to work. But yeah.